Welcome back. In this tutorial, we're going to take a look at the various ways that Photoshop represents color, specifically the RGB, Cmyk, Grayscale, and Monotone duotone color spaces. This is not only how Photoshop represents color, it's also the way your digital camera works as well. So we're going to start things off with RGB. Just about all the images you run into are RGB images, because that's how they're captured by digital cameras in the first place. RGB stands for red, green, and blue. This graphic represents the full spectrum of what the human eye can see in terms of color. RGB, like other color spaces, represents a more limited range of the available colors of the human eye. All the tiny lights on a monitor display pure red, green, or blue light. When you combine these colors together, you produce pure white light, as pictured here. To get a sense of how Photoshop uses this model, we'll use this image of a landscape as an example. Typically when you open Photoshop, the Layers panel is open on the lower right-hand side, but to understand how Photoshop uses colors, we're going to switch to the Channels panel. Initially, if you click on any of these channels, you'll see a grayscale representation of the image. And every one of these channels is going to look considerably different from its neighbor. But that's not exactly how Photoshop is seeing the channels. If you want to see things the way Photoshop sees them, then you need to go to the Preferences menu and go to Interface and click on Show Channels in Color. You'll immediately see that those channels in the lower right-hand corner become colorized. And this will give you a sense of how the different channels combine to see the full color image. You'll notice that in any given channel, the color will range from the pure color red, in this case, to much darker shades that approach black. To get a sense of how the colors mix together, we can simply add on another one of the color channels. Let's say blue. And you can see by mixing red and blue, we get a rather purple resulting image. When working with RGB, which is an additive color space, the more color that we throw at an image, the brighter it becomes. So as we add green, it gets even brighter as it reveals the kind of real color space of the original image. Now if you want to print the image, however, we're going to have to switch to a different color space. We're going to have to switch from RGB, which is the world of light, to the world of inks, which is the world of Cmyk, which stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. As seen in this image, most print media printed in by commercial techniques is a matrix of cyan, magenta, yellow, and black if you were to zoom in very, very closely to a printed surface. And the various patterns of these different matrices of color is what generates what we recognize as a full color image. Now in the world of Photoshop, we'll switch gears by going to the Image menu and go to Mode and click Cmyk Color. Photoshop will prompt us to flatten the image. We'll say no and OK. Now, before we say OK, look closely at the kind of most vivid colors of this image of the landscape, the kind of really vivid blue and pink of the sky and clouds, and watch how it changes as we switch to Cmyk. You'll notice that it gets dimmer, and that's because the Cmyk color space has a more limited range of colors than RGB can offer with the world of lights. You'll also notice that as we switched, our channels changed. And they now represent the different colors of Cmyk, and there's an additional channel because Cmyk has 4 different constituent parts. Like before, we can click the individual channels. For example, black or yellow, which is very hard to make out because it's so light, magenta. Unlike the RGB, these color spaces start with the full color, such as magenta, and then fade to white. I'll go ahead and add on all the channels again to reveal our full color image. But let's take a look at what happens if we abandon color altogether. If we convert to a black and white photograph, or what's known as grayscale in Photoshop. There's a couple of ways to do this in Photoshop. One way is to open the image menu, go to mode, and click grayscale. Photoshop will prompt us to flatten the image. We'll say OK. And then it'll also ask us to discard color information. And we'll see that we go down to one channel that's simply different shades of gray. Say that instead of converting the entire image to grayscale, you want to customize the experience a bit. We'll go ahead and undo and get back to our full color Cmyk image. And let's say we particularly like the cyan channel of the Cmyk image. And we want to see what that looks like in grayscale. We can go back to our preferences and interface, turn off the show channels in color option, which will reveal only the black and white version. And we'll go through our channels, and we really like the cyan version, the cyan channel in black and white. We can go back to image mode and grayscale. It'll again ask us to flatten the image and discard other channels, and we'll say OK. And now we only have the particular filter of what was cyan before in black and white. Finally, let's say you want to infuse a little bit of color back onto this black and white image. And let's say you want to do that in a precise way. This is an excellent opportunity to use the monotone or duotone color mode in Photoshop. To do this, you're going to go back up to the image pull-down menu and click duotone. You're now given the option to apply 1 to 4 specific inks of custom color to the grayscale image. Let's start with a monotone, which is just adding one ink, one kind of ink to the image. And let's say you really like the kind of cyan filter that you saw by selecting only the cyan channel before, but you want to maybe, let's say, add a little bit of purple to that. So you'll click the ink color, you'll select a specific kind of color that you're looking for. Let's say a bluish purple. You'll have to give it a name like I did here. And then you click OK, and you have a very custom monotone image. This can be a very powerful way to have an intentional burst of color in a composition you're making. Similarly, you can use two colors. If you change the type to duotone and select another color, let's say maybe a pink. Again, you have to give it a name. Now, by default, the two colors will be mixed evenly, which in this case makes a pinkish purple. But if you select these curves, you can decide what part of the light to dark spectrum you want that particular ink applied to. So let's say you only want the dark purple, you want the blue purple ink really only applied to the higher end of the spectrum. You can pull down this curve so it's only the kind of darkest parts of the image that that purple gets applied to. And similarly, let's say you only want the pink to be applied to the midtones. You can select only the midtones. And you can start to create some really interesting color compositions that bring out specific parts of the color spectrum at particular points. And color is at once a practical necessity that determines the both creation and output of compositions in Photoshop, but it's also a tool to play and explore and to create interesting compositions. And understanding of basic color spaces will help you accomplish that.